She was just a waitress in a forgotten town, scraping tips and swallowing shame to make it to her next shift, until one filthy joke from a leather-clad biker shattered what little pride she had left. The room laughed. No one stopped him. No one. Except for the man quietly sipping coffee in the corner. Michael B. Jordan, whose face no one recognized under his hood. But what he did next, it wasn't just about defending her. It was about settling a score he didn't even know he had. What if the person you're trying to save is hiding from you, too? The Crossroads Diner sat like a forgotten relic off the edge of Route 89, the kind of place people passed on their way to somewhere better. Its neon sign flickered through the dusty afternoon heat, buzzing weakly above a cracked parking lot where oil stains painted the asphalt like blood. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of burnt coffee, fried onions, and faded dreams. It was here that Mia worked 6 days a week. 29 years old, hair always in a loose bun, eyes always downcast. She didn't speak much, but when she did, it was with a voice softened by too many apologies. To the regulars, she was just the girl with the quiet hands. No one ever asked what had made her that way. No one cared. On this particular Tuesday, the midday lull was broken by the rumble of engines. Deep, thunderous. A chorus of mechanical beasts announcing the arrival of the Dead Reapers. A biker gang known up and down the Southwest for their tattoos, tempers, and taste for cruelty. The doors burst open like a storm front. 5 of them strutted in, helmets in hand, leather vests clinking with chains and patches. The leader, a bear of a man named Kurt Tanker Rollins, had a face like cracked pavement and eyes that had long since forgotten softness. As they took over 2 booths and barked for food, the diner seemed to shrink. Customers avoided eye contact. The cook disappeared behind the swinging kitchen door. Mia approached their table with a notepad trembling in her grip. Tanker looked her up and down, sneering at her faded apron and scuffed shoes. "What kind of discount do you give for pretty words, sweetheart?" he growled, loud enough for everyone to hear. His men snickered. Mia blinked and tried to keep her voice steady. "Just taking orders," she said. "That's it." But Tanker wasn't looking for food. He wanted blood. "I said, what kind of discount do you give for lying on your back?" He barked again, louder this time, grabbing a ketchup bottle and mimicking obscene gestures with it. The room froze. The other patrons lowered their heads, refusing to engage. One mother pulled her child closer. Mia stood there, frozen, not from shock, but from familiarity. This wasn't the first time she'd been humiliated, just the most public. As the biker's crude words filled the air, her eyes glistened, not with tears, but with the sting of swallowing dignity. A laugh erupted from one of the gang members, followed by another. The sound grew, echoing off the chrome fixtures and linoleum like a chorus of hyenas. At that moment, the man in the corner booth finally lifted his head. He'd been there the whole time, dressed in black with a baseball cap pulled low, sipping slowly from a chipped mug. The light hit his face just right, strong jawline, familiar eyes, the kind of calm presence that could silence a riot if you looked close enough. But no one did. Not yet. He stood slowly, like a shadow uncoiling, and walked toward the table. The air shifted. Even Tanker noticed the sudden quiet and looked up, half smiling. "You got something to say, coffee boy?" The biker sneered, licking ketchup off his thumb. The man didn't answer right away. He stopped beside Mia, eyes never leaving Tanker's, and said in a voice smooth as marble, "You ever been knocked off that stool of yours for talking too much?" The laughter died in a heartbeat. A long silence stretched across the diner like a noose tightening. Tanker stood abruptly, but his bravado wavered as he looked into the stranger's face. Something about it felt too calm, too collected, too familiar. Then, like a pin dropping in a vacuum, a teenager near the jukebox whispered, "Is that Michael B. Jordan?" The name sliced through the tension. Every head turned. Mia's lips parted, the first flicker of disbelief crossing her face. Michael didn't move. He simply tilted his head slightly and waited. Tanker's hands curled into fists. He wasn't just being challenged. He was being humiliated, by a celebrity no less, in front of his gang, in a town he thought he owned. He lunged forward, but Michael sidestepped easily, grabbing his wrist mid-swing and twisting it behind his back in one fluid motion. The ketchup bottle clattered to the ground. Tanker howled in surprise, brought to his knees in seconds. "Don't," Michael warned, confused kindness with weakness. Then he let go, turned back to Mia, and said softly, "You okay?" She nodded, still not believing this was real. Tanker groaned, but didn't get back up. His gang didn't move. They had never seen someone handle him like that. Not without a weapon. Michael tossed a 20 on the counter and left the diner, never looking back. But Mia watched him walk to a dusty black SUV, parked beside the row of chrome monsters. He got in and drove off into the desert, like a myth written in tire tracks. The customers buzzed with whispered awe. Some clapped, some stared. The cook finally peeked his head out. But Mia, she didn't move. Her fingers gripped the tray so tightly, her knuckles turned white. Because what no one knew, not the bikers, not the cook, not even Michael, was that this wasn't just some random assault. This wasn't just about power or humiliation. Tanker knew who Mia was, and the way he looked at her, that wasn't lust. That was recognition. And it meant the story was far from over. The open desert had always pulled at Michael in a way he couldn't explain. Like the silence of endless sand offered something no crowd or camera ever could: clarity. Just days before arriving at the Crossroads Diner, he'd stepped away from what would have been his biggest payday yet. A $60 million franchise sequel, with every executive in Hollywood begging for his signature. But Michael couldn't shake the feeling that he'd lost something along the way. Something human, something real. So he packed a duffel, ditched his team, and hit the road under an alias.
No existence.
No press. Just a man, a truck, and a past that still echoed louder than any applause. He didn't have a destination when he rolled through Arizona, but something in that faded diner, in the hollow clink of forks and strained silence, called to him before he even parked. It wasn't just the cheap coffee or the dusty windows. It was the stillness of it all. The sense that this place had stories buried beneath its floorboards. And then he saw her, Mia, before the biker gang even arrived. Something in her eyes looked familiar, like grief quietly learning to live in a cage. He hadn't expected to get involved. He told himself he'd eat, tip well, and be gone before anyone noticed him. But when that biker opened his mouth and started slinging filth with a smirk, Michael's heart clenched in a way it hadn't in years. He'd seen that kind of abuse before, on his cousin Jamal, who worked at a gas station back in Newark and got jumped by drunk regulars while the manager watched from the security booth. Michael had been 15 then, powerless. He hadn't forgotten the sound Jamal made when they found him. He hadn't forgotten the scar above his cousin's left brow. So when Tanker mocked Mia like she was property instead of a person, Michael felt time collapse. The past collided with the present, and something deep inside him snapped. His intervention wasn't about being a hero. It was about making sure no one else sat frozen while someone else's humanity got stomped into the linoleum. Still, even after leaving the diner, his hands trembled on the wheel, not from fear, but from something darker. An old anger that hadn't dulled, only buried. He didn't plan on returning. He drove west, toward the setting sun, trying to outrun the feeling that something about that diner encounter wasn't over. The road unspooled in front of him like a ribbon of silence, but his mind kept circling back. The way the biker looked at Mia hadn't been random. It wasn't flirtation. It wasn't even domination. It was something colder, personal. That detail gnawed at Michael until, 3 towns later, he pulled into a motel parking lot and just sat there, staring into the mirror. He wasn't done. Not yet. The next morning, before the sun was fully up, he turned back. He didn't go straight to the diner. Instead, he tailed the biker's crew. No disguise, just distance. Tanker's group wasn't subtle. They left a trail of noise and dust, settling at an old auto garage on the edge of a ghost town. The building looked abandoned from the outside, but Michael saw what they didn't want seen. Hidden cameras, spotters on the roof, a schedule that rotated like clockwork. This wasn't just a hangout, it was a base. Something big was being protected there. And Michael, by sheer instinct or fate, had stumbled into the kind of mess people died over. He parked a mile away and approached on foot under the cloak of twilight. From behind a rusted billboard, he watched two of the bikers dragging something into the garage. A crate, heavy and locked. But that wasn't what made his breath catch. Inside, through a broken pane of glass, he saw a wall of photos. Dozens. Hundreds. Most looked like mugshots, women of all ages, pinned up with scribbled notes underneath. Timelines. Codes. Symbols. In the center of it all, framed like a trophy, was a faded school portrait of a teenage girl. Bruised, terrified, and unmistakably Mia. The year stamped at the bottom, 2011. Michael's pulse surged. He snapped a quick photo with his burner phone and backed away, heart pounding. This wasn't about a waitress being harassed by a local thug. This was about history, dark, ugly, buried history. And Mia was at the center of it. Back at his motel, he tried to make sense of it all. He cross-referenced local news archives, missing persons lists, and scanned every pixel of the photo board he'd captured. Mia's name wasn't there, but her face was. And worse, Tanker had aged, but Michael could swear he recognized him from a case years ago, a background figure in a documentary about human trafficking in the Southwest. It had aired briefly, pulled quickly after rumors of corruption in law enforcement came to light. The pieces began falling into place, each one sharper than the last. Michael wasn't just stumbling onto a gang's dirty secrets. He was treading into a network, a system, a machine designed to silence people like Mia. She wasn't just a target. She was a survivor, possibly an escapee. And now the predator had returned. The next day, Michael walked into the diner again, this time in broad daylight, and took the same seat in the corner. Mia noticed him instantly, her face unreadable. When she brought his coffee, he looked her in the eye and said, "I need to talk to you. Somewhere private." She didn't ask why. She just nodded, her fingers trembling as they brushed the edge of the cup. Later that night, they met at a truck stop lit only by the flicker of a faulty neon sign. Michael showed her the photo of the wall. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She just went pale and said, "I thought they'd forgotten me." That single sentence hit Michael harder than any punch ever could. Because beneath it was a truth too heavy for one person to carry. She had escaped once. And now, with Michael in the mix, the past was clawing its way back with vengeance. The desert at night was deceptive. Tranquil on the surface, yet crackling with secrets under every stone. As Michael sat alone on the hood of his SUV, parked along a dirt road overlooking the biker compound, the silence felt like a countdown. Every instinct told him to walk away, to call the authorities, to let professionals handle it. But deep down, he knew the truth. People like Mia slipped through the cracks because the system didn't want to see them. He'd been protected his whole life by fame, connections, and a level of privilege that kept the worst of the world at bay. Mia had no such shield. Whatever she'd endured, she'd done it alone. And now, Michael had seen too much to pretend ignorance. The photo wall in that garage haunted him, each pinned face a scream no one had heard. But the most jarring part wasn't the faces, it was how organized it all was. The gang wasn't just criminals. They were part of something industrial, calculated, and deeply entrenched in the underbelly of the state. He spent the next 2 days surveilling from afar, mapping their patterns, marking when vehicles came and went, when guards switched posts, and how often Tanker himself appeared. The man moved like a king in exile, paranoid but powerful, respected by his pack but isolated in his thoughts. Michael noticed he always entered a separate trailer at sunset, one the others avoided. Through a scoped lens, Michael zoomed in and saw a wall of maps, pins, and something that looked like a ledger filled with names. Names that might match the ones from that photo wall. But more than the evidence, what chilled him was the atmosphere. It wasn't fear that kept the other gang members obedient. It was debt. Loyalty bought in blood or leverage, not belief. And yet, one thing stood out. A lanky, tattooed kid named Ryder who never quite fit the mold. He lingered near the edges, rarely laughed, and one night Michael caught him staring at a locket he wore under his shirt, his expression cracked by regret. That kid might be the key. Meanwhile, Mia kept working like nothing had changed. At the diner, she smiled when needed, filled orders and kept her voice steady. But Michael could see the shift in her posture. Her eyes searched every shadow. She'd told him pieces of her past, but never the whole truth. What he knew was this. At 17, she disappeared for 6 months. The official report claimed she ran away from home. Her parents, long since passed, had accepted the police explanation. But Mia's voice trembled when she said, "I didn't run away. I was taken." The gang had moved her between safe houses, threatened her with death if she spoke out, and used her for things she still couldn't bring herself to name. One night, during a thunderstorm, she escaped through a bathroom window while they were distracted by a drug deal gone wrong. She'd walked for miles barefoot until a trucker found her and dropped her off in a nearby town. From there, she built a life, quiet and invisible, until Tanker walked into the diner and stared at her like he'd found a ghost. Michael couldn't shake the sense that Tanker didn't just remember Mia. He had plans for her. And if he had been involved in human trafficking, there was no telling what information he held, what names were in that ledger, or how deep the rot went. That's when Michael made a decision. He wouldn't just expose them, he would dismantle everything, brick by brick, starting with the compound. He returned to the motel, set up a makeshift command center with his laptop and burner phones, and began digging into land records, business connections, and old case files. He discovered that the garage property was owned under a shell corporation tied to a now-defunct trucking company that had been investigated a decade ago for cross-border smuggling. Charges dropped, evidence vanished, and the lead investigator on that case, found dead in a staged suicide 2 weeks after the report. Michael's blood ran cold. This wasn't just a gang problem. It was systemic, institutional. By the third night, Michael broke into the compound. Disguised in biker gear and under cover of darkness, he slipped through a hole in the back fence and made his way to the trailer. Inside, he snapped pictures of the ledger, the maps, the encrypted hard drives left carelessly unlocked. But as he turned to leave, his gaze fell on something unexpected. A second photo of Mia, taken recently, taped to the wall beneath a note. Relocated asset. Priority recon. Michael froze. That meant they hadn't just recognized her. They had already begun planning to reclaim her. This wasn't a chance encounter at the diner. This was a hunt. And Mia was the prey. He backed out quickly, heart hammering in his chest, only to find someone waiting outside the trailer. It was Ryder, cigarette dangling from his lips, eyes unreadable in the moonlight. They stared at each other for a tense second before Ryder muttered, "You're not one of us." Michael didn't deny it. Instead, he asked, "You want out?" Ryder looked toward the trailer, then back at him. "Depends. What's your plan?" That moment marked the beginning of a fragile alliance. Ryder, it turned out, had a sister who went missing 3 years ago. He joined the gang hoping for answers and got entangled in a system he didn't fully understand until it was too late. He didn't trust Michael, not completely, but he hated Tanker more. That was enough. Back at the diner the next morning, Mia approached Michael between orders, her voice low. "They're watching me again," she whispered. "I can feel it." Michael nodded grimly. "We need to end this. Soon." There was no more time for strategy. No more room for doubt. The reckoning was coming, and they had to act before Mia's name ended up not just in a file, but on a slab. The desert had gone quiet again. But this time it wasn't peace. It was the calm before a storm. The desert sun rose like a slow-burning matchstick, casting long gold shadows across the cracked earth as if nature itself was holding its breath. Inside the diner, the air buzzed with unease, though no one dared say why. Mia moved through her morning routine like muscle memory, her smile stitched into place with threadbare hope, but her eyes flicked toward the windows more often now, scanning every reflection, every figure that lingered too long near the pumps outside. Michael sat in his usual booth, pretending to scroll through his phone while actually keeping track of every person who walked in and out. The night before had changed everything. He now had hard evidence linking Tanker and his crew to trafficking operations stretching across state lines. But the real problem wasn't gathering intel. It was figuring out how to act on it without getting Mia killed. Ryder had sent a message that morning. "We're moving her tonight." That single line detonated any illusion of safety they had left. Time had run out. Michael's heart was pounding beneath his calm exterior as he slipped Mia a folded napkin with a time and location. She didn't speak, didn't even nod, just brushed his hand in acknowledgement and continued on like nothing had happened. Later, in the dead of night, they met at an abandoned barn a few miles out, where Michael laid out the only two options left. Option 1. He takes the evidence to the feds, hoping someone up the chain isn't corrupt, but risking that the gang goes underground with Mia as their first act of retaliation. Option 2. They hit the compound tonight, fast and brutal, expose everything live through Ryder's hacked feed, and destroy the core of the operation before it disappears for good. Mia didn't flinch. "We burn it," she said, her voice laced with steel. "They don't get to erase me again." Michael watched her in silence for a long moment, then nodded. "Then we do it your way." For the first time since meeting her, he saw not just a survivor but a warrior. The girl who once ran barefoot through a thunderstorm had become the storm. With Ryder's help, they created a blueprint. Michael would infiltrate the compound through the northern utility corridor where Ryder had sabotaged the motion sensors. Mia would stay hidden in the surveillance van, controlling the drone feed and communications. Ryder would handle power disruptions and crowd control using hacked frequencies to trigger the garage's alarm system, giving them cover to move. At exactly 2:17 a.m., the compound would plunge into darkness. But even the best plans unravel in the face of chaos. As Michael crept through the shadows toward the trailer containing the ledger, a gun clicked behind him. He froze, recognizing the voice before he turned. "Should have stayed on screen, pretty boy," Tanker snarled, stepping from the darkness with a pistol aimed directly at his chest. Michael slowly raised his hands, trying to keep him talking. "You're trafficking women," he said evenly. "You're done." Tanker laughed, the sound low and hollow. "Trafficking? You really think this is about women? You have no idea what you've walked into." And then, without warning, he fired. The bullet grazed Michael's shoulder, spinning him backward into the dirt. Blood soaked his sleeve, pain blinding, but instinct kept him moving. He rolled, grabbed a chunk of concrete from the ground, and flung it at the floodlight above, plunging the area into pitch black. Tanker cursed, firing wildly, but Michael was already crawling behind a rusted generator. In the surveillance van, Mia screamed his name into the radio, but static answered back. Ryder, panicked, began triggering the failsafes. Alarms blared, emergency lights flickered, and confusion spread across the compound like wildfire. Through the drone's cracked lens, Mia saw men scrambling, shouts of betrayal erupting as some of the younger bikers turned on the older ones. The chaos was perfect. It was also hell. Michael managed to slip away under the cover of sirens, clutching the ledger he'd grabbed from the trailer. His arm throbbed, blood leaking steadily, but adrenaline kept him upright. He stumbled into the van where Mia wrapped his wound with shaking hands, tears streaking her cheeks. "You said this would be clean," she whispered. Michael looked at her, his jaw tight. Justice never is. But before they could escape, a final betrayal sliced through the night like a razor. Ryder, breathless and bleeding from a blow to the ribs, burst into the van, followed closely by a tall, older man in a sheriff's uniform. "You've gone too far," the man said, raising a gun. "This ends here." Michael stared in disbelief. Sheriff Kincaid, the man who had closed Mia's missing person case years ago. The same one whose name appeared on the property ownership documents Michael had scanned. "You," Michael said, voice full of fury. "You were in on this the whole time?" Kincaid smirked. "There's a reason these cases don't go to trial. You think we just lose files?" But before he could pull the trigger, a shot rang out. Kincaid's eyes widened as a bullet struck his shoulder, spinning him backward. Behind him, Ryder stood frozen, smoking gun in hand. "My sister was on that wall," he said, voice breaking. "You lied to all of us." The moment shattered whatever fragile silence remained. Michael, Mia, and Ryder piled into the van, speeding off into the black desert with the ledger, the footage, and a flash drive filled with names too dangerous to utter aloud. Behind them, the compound erupted in flames, set by a homemade incendiary Ryder had planted near the fuel tanks. As they watched from a distant ridge, the inferno lit up the sky like a funeral pyre. Mia didn't cry. She just stared, her jaw clenched, eyes reflecting fire. "That place was my prison," she said softly. "Now it's gone." But Michael knew what she didn't say. The past wasn't finished. It never was. Somewhere in the ashes, someone would survive. And vengeance would find a new face. The morning after the compound's fiery collapse arrived with a surreal calm, the kind that feels like a lie whispered through sunlight. News vans lined the edge of the road near what remained of the biker hideout, now a smoldering skeleton of twisted metal and blackened earth. Michael, Mia, and Ryder had vanished before dawn, slipping through service roads and abandoned train lines toward a safer hideout Michael's old military consultant, once used for covert training ops. But peace was fleeting. As the sun climbed higher, so did the stakes. National media had picked up the story, but the headlines were muddy. Explosion at Arizona garage linked to alleged trafficking ring. The word alleged stung. Worse, local law enforcement issued a statement denying any connection to Sheriff Kincaid or a broader conspiracy. The narrative was already being spun into something smaller, something easier to bury. And just as Michael feared, they were being hunted again. Someone had leaked their location. Their safe house had become a bullseye. That night, with Mia asleep in the back room and Ryder on lookout, Michael stepped out to breathe. The desert wind cut sharp against his cheek, the pain in his shoulder dull but constant. He stared at the stars, trying to make sense of everything. They had the ledger. They had the footage. They had living proof of the operation's horrors. And yet, all it took was one corrupt press agent, one buried article, one denial from someone in uniform, to strip it all of meaning. Michael wasn't used to this kind of war. On screen, justice came with music swells and final scenes. In the real world, it came with doubt, delay, and death threats. His phone buzzed in his pocket, an encrypted message from a blocked number. He opened it, and everything inside him went still. It was a photo, grainy, from a gas station's security camera. In the background, barely visible, was a man stepping out of a rental car. The timestamp was 2 hours ago. The location, 8 miles south of the safe house. And the man? Michael knew him. The face in the photo belonged to Malcolm Quinn, a former studio fixer and crisis handler who used to clean up scandals for Hollywood's elite. But Malcolm had another reputation beneath the surface, one whispered about in dark corners of the industry. Rumors tied him to overseas trafficking rings used to control young talent, to silence accusers, to destroy lives under the guise of career management. Michael had severed ties with him years ago after discovering how many blackmail operations he'd orchestrated. But Malcolm never took rejection lightly. And now he was here, in Arizona. Too close, too fast. That meant one thing. This wasn't just a local conspiracy anymore. This was connected to something massive, something Michael had brushed against without realizing it. His name wasn't just a shield anymore, it was a target. Michael returned inside, his blood boiling, and found Ryder cleaning his sidearm. "We're not dealing with just bikers anymore," he said. "We're dealing with suits, media, maybe even someone on the inside of my world." Ryder nodded grimly. "They've got reach." Michael's hands tightened into fists. "Then we dig deeper." He spent the next 2 hours piecing together Malcolm's last known business ties, linking shell companies from LA to New Mexico, finding threads that tied back to the trucking company and even to Kincaid's campaign donors. It was all there, hidden in tax documents and donation records, buried in production budgets, the same names repeated again and again under different entities. But the final blow came when Michael cross-referenced an old NDA breach settlement from a TV actress who had accused a studio executive of abuse. The settlement had been signed and sealed by Malcolm Quinn. One of the witnesses listed? Kurt Tanker Rollins, the biker. He wasn't just a thug, he was a cleaner. A tool used by Hollywood to disappear problems, transport bodies, and enforce silence. Mia hadn't been a random victim. She'd been collateral in a war no one was supposed to see. Just before sunrise, Ryder stepped outside to take a piss and never came back. When Michael went to find him, all he found was Ryder's flashlight, cracked and smeared with blood, lying at the edge of the ravine. Mia's scream pierced the morning sky seconds later when she found the van ransacked. Their backup drives missing, their satellite phone gone. Michael grabbed her and ran. No time for grief, no time for goodbyes. The desert swallowed their footsteps as headlights danced in the distance, closing in. They ducked into a washout beneath an old bridge, hearts racing, dust choking their throats. Michael clutched Mia's hand as she trembled beside him. "He was trying to help us," she whispered, tears tracking through the dirt on her cheeks. "He wanted redemption." Michael said nothing, his eyes fixed on the headlights as they passed overhead. The moment burned itself into his memory. Not just the loss of Ryder, but the realization that their enemies weren't chasing justice. They were erasing it. Later that day, holed up in a forgotten ranger cabin deep within Tonto National Forest, Michael opened an old hard drive Mia had buried years ago. "I saved it," she said simply, "in case they ever came back." On it were videos, recordings from her time in captivity. Faces, conversations, coded language between handlers. One file stood out. A conversation between Kincaid and an anonymous man whose voice had been distorted. But Michael knew it. It was Malcolm's. In it, he said the words that sealed everything. "Let her disappear. She's not marketable anymore." Mia sat in silence as Michael listened, her fingers pressed to her lips. "They wanted me gone because I couldn't be shaped anymore," she said. "Because I started fighting back." That night, as coyotes howled and the sky churned with smoke from a new wildfire in the distance, Michael made his choice. He wouldn't just expose them. He would destroy every last name in that ledger. But not through courts, not through headlines, through their own vanity, through the one thing they all worshipped, public image. He drafted a message to his PR team with a single request: schedule a live interview. National. Prime time. No pre-screening. No conditions. The title? The faces they tried to erase. But before hitting send, he looked at Mia and asked one final time, "Are you sure?" She nodded. "Let the world see me." And for the first time, Michael understood the true cost of silence. Not just to victims, but to those who witness and say nothing. He pressed send. War had begun. The live broadcast aired on a Tuesday night, right as America sat down for dinner. Networks had fought to carry it, each one scrambling to land the exclusive when word leaked that Michael B. Jordan would be going off script, live and unfiltered. The image that filled the screen when the lights came on wasn't one of red carpets or sleek movie sets. It was a dim room, raw and unpolished, with a simple wooden chair at center and a single overhead bulb casting hard shadows across Michael's face. He didn't wear makeup. He didn't wear a suit. He wore truth, heavy and searing, and next to him, seated with her hands calmly folded in her lap, was Mia. She didn't smile. She didn't cry. She simply stared into the camera with a gaze that said, "Remember me." And when Michael spoke, he didn't lead with her story. He led with the systems, the decades of silence, the veils of power, the institutions that buried victims beneath contracts and credibility, and the names that used their status to strip others of theirs. He spoke names that had never been said aloud on air: executives, lawmen, producers, enablers, and then he played the tapes. The room went silent. Mia's voice on the recordings, raw and cracking, filled the airwaves like a scream that could no longer be ignored. Faces appeared: women, girls, men, even children. Each one a blurred but haunting testament to the reality behind the curtains of success. And then, a twist no one saw coming. Michael revealed not only the scope of the operation, but the fact that it had been quietly funded through fake philanthropic donations by a media foundation meant to empower survivors. The betrayal sent shockwaves through the entertainment world. But it didn't stop there. Michael then pulled up a split-screen image, one half showing Tanker's smirking face from a police mugshot taken just an hour before. The other half showed Malcolm Quinn, dazed and handcuffed, as federal agents led him out of his Malibu home. Michael had coordinated it all, timed the live feed to a sting operation conducted in tandem with an underground network of former intelligence contacts and nonprofit watchdog groups. The room exploded into chaos. Anchors gasped. Social media melted. But Michael remained still. "You can silence a person," he said, voice steady. "But you can't bury the truth forever." In the days that followed, cities rioted not with fire, but with questions. Journalists uncovered links to multiple industries, congressional hearings were scheduled, and several public figures resigned overnight. Studios scrubbed records. Lawyers scrambled. But amid the noise, one quiet victory rose like smoke from a sacred fire. Mia was finally seen. Not as a victim, as a survivor. She gave no follow-up interviews, refused all press inquiries, and disappeared from the public just days after the broadcast. Michael respected that. She'd said what she needed to say. Now she deserved peace. He returned to his home in the hills, but the world he re-entered no longer felt the same. There were paparazzi parked on every corner, but he ignored them. He didn't speak to anyone about the scars on his shoulder or the nightmares that came at 3 a.m. He just trained, ran, wrote, and waited, because part of him knew that fire like this didn't go out quietly. 1 month later, a letter arrived. No return address, no stamp, just left on the seat of his parked truck in a garage only he had access to. Inside was a single sentence written in block letters. "You only cut off one head." Michael stared at the paper for a long time, then folded it and placed it in his jacket pocket. That night, he drove out into the desert alone, retracing the path to the scorched compound. He walked the ruins like a man walking through memory, each step sinking into ash, until he reached the center where the trailer had once stood. There, he buried a small tin box with a flash drive inside. Every document, video, and testimony they had collected. Insurance. Truth in the dirt. A legacy for someone else to find if he couldn't finish what he'd started. In a twist of bitter irony, Hollywood came calling with offers like never before. Studios wanted to buy his story. Networks wanted a docuseries. Book deals poured in. But Michael declined them all. He didn't need applause. He needed accountability. Instead, he funneled his earnings into an anonymous foundation for exploited youth, quietly funding safe houses and legal teams for those caught in the same net that once held Mia. He watched from afar as headlines faded, as names resurfaced with rebrands and public apologies, but he didn't move to stop them. Yet, he waited, watched, and built, because he knew this wasn't over. Justice, real justice, was slow and messy and violent in its honesty, and sometimes it required a second act. 1 year later, on the anniversary of the broadcast, a new video dropped online, posted from an encrypted channel with no names attached. It featured dozens of survivors, not just of the original ring, but from similar networks across the country. Each one looked into the camera and told the world who they were. No more masks, no more blurred faces, just truth. It was raw, it was horrifying, and it was beautiful. At the end of the video, in black and white, were 5 simple words: "We are not afraid anymore." The clip went viral in minutes. Donations surged. Protests reignited. And in a quiet diner halfway across the country, a waitress with a scar on her wrist smiled at a young girl as she poured her coffee and said, "You can always start again." Michael watched the video from a rooftop, phone in hand, hood pulled low. Somewhere behind him, a motorcycle revved. He didn't turn around, just pocketed the phone, exhaled slow, and whispered into the night, "Let's ride."